Hey guys, this is Dr. Mike Wu Meng. Welcome to another edition of Bootstrap MD. This is the podcast for healthcare and physician entrepreneurs. I say this, I always say I'm eager to talk with my next guest, but this one is really, I've been really eager. This is like really turnabout because the last time we actually chatted was probably, we were saying just before the call, probably 15, 16 plus years ago. I mentioned that when I left practice, my medical practice back in 2004, I got involved in entrepreneurship, internet marketing, and helped co-found a software company that allowed me to speak not only in the US, I got to go to Asia, and I got to go to Australia. And that's where I met my next gentleman at a seminar. And I think, David, you probably were just out of college or just getting started your company, but we'll get into this. But at the time, he was starting his SEO system, your search engine optimization company, and he grew that to be one of the most trusted digital agencies, which is known as Melbourne SEO Services. He became a CEO, but then he decided to step back from the operations and hired another CEO. And from that, he found out that he was a systems devotee and that he was able to find a process that worked for his business. And he thought he could be able to share that with others. And he founded System Hub and Systemology, which is actually a best-selling book that I happened to pick up, which kind of started this whole podcast introduction and conversation. Today, he has a mission to free all business owners worldwide from the daily operations of running their business. Recognized as a high-achieving entrepreneur, you'll find many of his keynote presentations on YouTube, including TEDx, WordCamp, and Pro Blogger. I'd like to introduce you to the program, Mr. David Jenyns. David, how are you doing?
Hey, Mike. Yes, an absolute pleasure to be here and a blast from the past.
A blast from the past. But as I mentioned, it was, I mentioned at the beginning, I own about different med spas and weight loss clinics here in Southern California. We've got 20 plus employees managing different locations. I thought I did a pretty good job in organizations, but I could always improve. And I just happened to go on Amazon and I'm looking at books on operations. We got Gino Wickman and other books that I've read. And then your book came out and I go, I know that name. Where have I known that name? And then I searched, it was like, oh, I met this young man back in Australia. And if I remember, I guess we could talk about it. You were, I believe, attending it or attending one of the conferences where I spoke at. And maybe I think you're just at the beginning of starting your agency.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which event it was. It might have been a Frank Kern event or an Ed Dale event. But yes, you were kind of one of the original OGs in the internet marketing space. Always loved the work that you did. So definitely a pleasure to join with you again. But since then, that was kickstarted my career with the digital agency. I ran that business for 13 years or owned it for 13 years. And I worked in that business for about 10 of those years. And it was that final transition as we found out we were pregnant and I realized I'm turning into potentially being a workaholic dad unless I start to change something. And that was a real turning point for me. And I stepped back and really looked at how do you remove a business owner from the day-to-day operations, and tested a lot of assumptions and misconceptions that I had as I hired the CEO and really stepped out. And that's when I discovered my true passion is to help business owners do the same.
Now, I mentioned on the call, I have many people who listen to my program. Most of them are physicians. Some of them have their own practice, or maybe they are a widely regarded employee in their practice. But for those who are the practice owners, here in the States, as someone who's starting up a practice, they're a physician, so they're seeing all of the patients, but then they're also maybe doing some of the marketing, they're doing their finances, they're paying the bills. And I know you've been known for helping kind of systematizing different types of practice and businesses. Where can they even start the process of actually taking themselves away? Because for many, it just seems like a foreign concept.
Yeah, that's definitely the first question people say is, well, what do I systemize first? Because quite often I'll have the discussion with the business owner and they all agree that systems and processes are important And to build a business that works without you, you need them. Yet, for whatever reason, people don't make the space to do it, or they say, oh, I've tried to do that in the past and it doesn't quite work, and they just haven't made it stick. And that's what traps them in their business, because a lot of business owners, like you said, if they're the physician who knows how to look after the client and they've always done that, they don't necessarily see the difference between knowing how to do the job or the thing versus running a business that delivers the thing. And so there's a difference to running the difference versus doing the job, or running the business versus doing the job. And once we kind of have that breakthrough and we both go, yes, you know what, systems and processes are important, then it's like, well, where do you start? And the process I've got is a thing I call the critical client flow. And it helps to identify what are the 10 to 15 systems that help you to deliver the core product or service. And you do need to find somewhere to start, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed with the hundreds of things that go on in your business, and you want to systemize everything and you want to have checklists and processes for everything. And then you're like, oh, well, now I don't really know where to start. But something to kind of keep in mind is this idea that just because you don't systemize it doesn't mean it's going to magically stop happening in your business. It's already kind of happening. Your business is already kind of running. So that kind of helps to take a little bit of the pressure off. And then it becomes a game of the 80-20. We just have to think about, well, what are the essential systems that we can start with? And oftentimes with this critical client flow exercise, it's just about identifying the primary target audience, the primary product or service, and then the linear journey that client and the business goes through to deliver the product or service. So how do you get their attention? What happens when the inquiry comes in? How do you then book them into the system? How do you, once they come in, what are they doing inside the waiting room? Once they go in and they visit the doctor, like that bit with the doctor, maybe there's certain things where he's taking notes on a patient, and how does he close out that consultation? And they go back out to the receptionist and they book in their next appointment. So it's about mapping out that linear journey and creating systems and processes, or not even creating, it's about capturing what's already being done. Because again, a lot of the practices that you probably work with, they're already running, they've already got clients, things are kind of already working. It's just sometimes it's very dependent on a particular team member, maybe heavily dependent on the business owner, or maybe there's a receptionist who always books patients in, and if she's away sick on Thursday, then we're not able to book patients in because no one else knows how to do it as well as Jenny does. And it's just about identifying those critical systems and capturing what's being done, so that becomes the new standard or the base level.
As a doctor, I wasn't used to asking for help, especially when it came to subjects outside of medicine. But then I found physiciancoaches.com. In an instant, I found hundreds of experts to help me in all aspects of life. On areas I was afraid to ask: dealing with burnout, starting a side gig, money management, even help with my marriage. And the best part? Nearly all experts are physicians themselves. After reading their profile and a quick chat, I knew I found the right mentor for me. At physiciancoaches.com, help from professional colleagues is just a click away.
How hard is it? Because, I'm sure you've been there as well, where you end up saying, you know what, it's just easier for me to just do it on my own, right? I've had this where I've had a medical assistant, and we have processes when they have a question, they talk to the nurse that's there. But what ends up happening is they end up calling me because the medical assistant says, you know what, she's busy, and it's just easier for me to get an answer to you. How do you stop that process? But also, in addition to that, how do you feel like, it's just easier for me to just do it by myself because it just takes too long for me to give it to somebody else, because no one can do it better than I can?
It's definitely a process that happens over time. You don't just wake up one morning and go, oh, I've got a systemized business. It ends up being a change in culture in the organization, and you each time issues come up, once you've got the framework right, you're locking that process down further and getting those answers in a central location. So at the start, it feels a bit like whack-a-mole, and there's always something popping up, and you're trying to fix it at the system level so that you capture the way it's done for next time. So there's quite a few things that need to happen. You have to train the team to look to the system or the process first to try and help solve their own problems. That's part of it. And as a business owner, you need to really encourage the team members to try and help to solve their own problems. And the other thing to remember is, depending on the skill of the team member, especially when you're getting started out and you're just putting some of these processes in place, you capture, it's almost like the blue skies version of if nothing goes wrong and the client says exactly what they need to say or exactly the way that we would like it to go, then here is the process that captures that. And new team members train on that very basic process. And that's just how they cut their teeth. And then anytime there are variations to that, that's when it gets escalated to a more senior team member who can help to solve that. And that's the process where that new team member then starts to learn how to handle exceptions. And the process is just a great way to get someone started. And then we start to build in some of those variations into the system. So it very much is an organic process that grows over time. There's a lot of persistence required here. And most of that resistance also comes from the initial staff, because if you're introducing this new idea of systemizing and they're like, well, we've always done it this way, why do I need to change the way that I'm doing things? That's where that resistance comes. But as you start to get some of these processes in place and you get over the hump, when new team members come on board, that's all they ever know. They just know that the first thing before they go to Mike or before they go to the boss or whoever it is to ask the question, you first need to consult the systems and see, is there already an answer there? And it's training that early on, which is critical, and that starts to change the culture.
What advice would you give? Because, it's certainly probably easier if you are the CEO or the owner of the company. But for many, they may just be an employee. They might be a high-ranking employee, let's say at a hospital, and they see some, inadequacies in the way that they are doing things. Perhaps they get appointed to some type of committee. But just like you said, maybe they're at a hospital that's been doing this for 80 plus years. Dave, just let you know, in the medical industry, we still use fax machines. So it's very slow moving in some of these dinosaur type industries. What would you say to them in terms of, I guess, persuasion into like identifying, like, here are the problems that we're having that are costing you money and time?
A great book, obviously, Systemology, but another one in the medical space, they've got quite a few, is that checklist manifesto.
Right.
And I think the first thing that needs to happen is you need to get some of the key people in leadership to go, yes, I want to do this. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the ones doing the documentation. In fact, oftentimes your high skilled team members are the most busy, and it's not the best use of their time to be documenting the process, but they do need to believe in it, support it, create space for it, lead by example with it. So I think that's first thing. You need to try and get some key team members on board and helping them to understand that all problems in the business or in the hospital or practice or whatever are actually systems problems. Like, at the root of it, that's just a mindset and the way that I think about business. And it just helps me to realize that the problems are solvable. Like, what is it that has gone on that has occurred this problem or made this problem happen? Can we trace it back? And then can that system be re-engineered to solve that problem once and for all? So it's trying to get that thinking and helping them to understand that the systems improve everybody's situation. That's probably the other big thing. Oftentimes when business owners introduce the idea of creating systems and processes. People think, oh, am I going to lose my job? Are they looking to replace me? Are they trying to capture what I'm doing? Whereas it needs to be reframed so that the team knows that this makes your job easier. It means that you can go away on a holiday and have a week off and know that the boss isn't going to be calling you up every second day asking you where that client patient profile is, or whatever it might be. The idea of having systems and processes means that team members can step in and out so that you can have a restful break, and when you come back, you can hit the ground running. Or for other team members, you need to let them know, by building a systems culture here, this helps you to move up in our organization because you can capture some of the key tasks you're doing and then start to delegate down, which then creates, space for you to work on higher value tasks. So a lot of it has to do with getting the buy-in from the team and helping them to understand how it benefits them individually, and then trying to get some examples together of how it works. Like if I was a staff member and I was wanting to try and do this, or maybe I'd try and get Systemology or the checklist manifesto into the hands of the right people. And then I might start to solve some of my own problems with systems so that I can showcase that and say, wow, we had this problem. This is what I did. This is now going to solve this problem once and for all. Hey, we should now try and do more of this around the business.
So somebody's listening to this and say, hey, David, this sounds great, but let me tell you, in my company, we've got Margie here, and she's been doing this for 20 plus years, and I've asked her to do a few things, and she's not budging. You gave us some examples of like, hey, maybe this is part of the team, this is part of the mission, but is there some things that you also identify? Does it mean, is it a new title? Does it require them to get a raise? Or is it identifying people who, like, whatever we do, they're not really with the program, and maybe it's time Margie has to say goodbye?
Yeah, you definitely want to give the team members as much chance as possible to jump on board and support them. And you say, hey, this is what we're doing. If you are looking to change the culture, though, some people will start to self-select out. And in the early days, that might mean maybe a team member isn't the right fit. As I said, moving forward, it makes it easier when you're recruiting new people because you can project this stuff right up front. When someone looks at a job ad, maybe you link to a system or a process and say, these are the types of things you're going to be doing. Or maybe in the interview process, you ask the questions that help them know that you're a systems-driven organization. So that moving forward, this will cease to become a problem. But it is the ones that are already in the organization. It's that Margie who's been doing that role for however long. And you have to think about how to support them through. It starts with helping Margie to know how this improves her situation. And there was a little window there. It's less there, but it is still there. It's never been easier to actually change the culture in an organization than right now, because everything that happened with COVID, you can just blame it on COVID, which is, we have to change the way that we're doing things because, there's a chance that you might need to be off sick because, or carers leave because someone in your family gets COVID, and I want to make sure that things keep running smoothly. So by the time you come back, you can hit the ground running. So there's a couple of ways and techniques like that you can put forward this idea that this change is necessary, and you give them every opportunity to jump on board and support it. There's other little techniques, like you want to make it easy on the team members, because sometimes great team members are really, really busy. In fact, usually all great team members are busy. So you want to make the process of documentation and capturing what they're doing as easy as possible. We have a thing we call a systems champion, where we suggest a business identifies the systems champion who really drives this initiative, who naturally is a very organized person, systems-driven person, and you have that person work alongside the knowledgeable worker. You have her or him work alongside Margie, and you record Margie doing her tasks, and then they're the ones who do the documentation. And then Margie, all she has to do is proofread and double check. So there's a couple of little tricks like that to lighten the load and make it easier and help Margie see this is a good thing. But there have been times, and I've worked with companies that have just found team members that have been so resistant that they've moved on. But if you head down this path and you make things very transparent and open, so the whole team can see, like when you're assigning tasks and you've got a system or a process attached to it, and then if things aren't being followed, it actually makes it much easier to enforce, because you say, oh, we have a way of doing things here and this is what it is. And I don't care if you have the system or the process open or not, if you're executing flawlessly. But if you're not executing flawlessly, then you need to have the system or process open until you're following our particular way. And then once you've got that way down, it's okay. And we just do that for consistency. So it's just building up the muscle, because at the start, there will be some challenges and resistance, and you just have to get good at dealing with it. But I feel like business owners are, as long as they get this and they get bitten by the bug and they keep sticking with it, they'll get the result.
Technology has certainly changed. I mean, talk about 2006 to now, right? Things have changed. We've got, Chat GPT, video streaming, Zoom calls like this in perfect quality. I'm talking to you in Australia, great quality. It's amazing. But with technology, it gets a little bit more confusing and more intertwined. And I guess specifically what I'm looking at is the way that we interact, with different employees. Case in point, with my staff, as I mentioned, we got multiple locations. We were using Skype for a lot of our communication. Then it turned into texting. And then it turned into, email and Skype and texting. And now we're using Slack. And there's some already pushback on Slack. What is the role that technology plays into systemization? Is it a curse or is it a benefit for us?
I think the best way, and I often go back to my SEO days to think about how Google would systemize things. And the way that they did it, they would start off, they'd come up with this hypothesis and say, oh, we believe that if we make this change to the algorithm, then it's going to improve search results. And so once they've come up with the hypothesis, they then write it in and they start running some tests. And then they have humans on the other end of that who review the result and then go, oh, is this good? We've got the quality search guidelines and we make sure that things still meet with that and it's delivering a great result. And okay, this is looking good. Let's now program this into the algorithm and fully automate it and roll it out for everybody because our hypothesis was proven correct. So as Google is, probably extremely systemized, as we would imagine, and they're driven by a lot of tech, they still start off with human automation first. The human comes up with the idea, they roll it out and they do the manual checks, and all of that happens before they roll it into the technology. So I always suggest with people, you systems and processes are almost like that version 1, and you don't need where you can, you don't need to roll in too much tech to start with. Just make it as lo-fi as possible. And then over time, you can introduce technology solutions where you might go, oh, this chunk can now be replaced with this software tool. So that's just one premise that I keep in mind. But I think technology is great. And we see obviously a lot of changes you mentioned with AI and we see it in our space where we focus on systems and processes, and using Chat GPT can help to accelerate the documentation of process. We do a Loom recording and we take the transcript and we feed it into Chat GPT, and it can help to create version number 1 of a system or a process. The human still comes in afterwards and polishes it up and makes sure no steps are missing and gets it saved into the right location and all those sorts of things. So a lot of those tools are, they just make your best team members even more efficient, but they're not necessarily a replacement. It just means that your best team members can work on more things. But I definitely think there is, once you figure out your way, there's a lot of huge benefits that can be gained by replacing chunks of work with software that can streamline the process.
And in your experience, and again, I'm going to talk about, we talked about COVID, and with COVID came the Zoom meetings, right? Everybody was doing Zoom. And it seems now I'm on a Zoom call every single day.
Yes, yeah.
Where does systematology, can it help with that? Or do you encourage more meetings? How does that work? Because I know about you, I seem like my whole day is full of Zoom calls all day.
Mine too. Yeah. Look, there are a few things that can make the Zooms more effective. Like one of the tools that we use is we want to make sure that it's very clear what action items come from a meeting and who's responsible. It's almost like taking minutes. And some of the new technology can help to speed that up. I mean, transcribing a call that you might have, feeding it into ChatGPT and asking it to pull the action items and who's doing them, and then having some sort of summary. So that way we're making the most of those calls. And then the way to think about it is developing a process off the back of that. So that way you can have an admin assistant or someone step in behind you that follows a process to make that as easy as possible for the higher skilled team members who might be on those Zoom calls. But we definitely struggle with that Zoom fatigue and running meetings all the time. And, you have a certain amount of time booked in, and oftentimes the meeting will expand to the space that you give it. So I think having a clear agenda on what it is that you're there to talk about, and oftentimes shortening the meeting down is better. Like, rather than going, oh, we don't know how long this is going to take, let's book out 45 minutes or an hour. Sometimes you're just better off going for shorter to be more efficient. But yeah, I don't have like a magical cure-all, unfortunately, for that one.
Yeah, it seems like it. But when you have systems and processes, hopefully you don't always have to be on the meeting, and not everybody in your organization needs to be on it. That's what I've learned. It's like, why am I on this one?
Yeah.
Now, I know you're very busy. You work with a lot of these top businesses, and but I did want to kind of, and just on a personal note, is that one of the ways that I started my practice was I read the E-Myth, and the one thing, if everybody remembers from the E-Myth, is that the one phrase is like, you got to work on your business, not in your business. And in your book Systemology, you talk about your meeting Michael Gerber and then actually working with him. Can you talk about that? Because it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I look back now and it just feels like the universe was smiling on me or something. It opened this huge opportunity for me. I was in the digital agency, and I just kind of realized that we were pregnant, and I'd taken a bit of time off. We focused on systemizing, and I plugged a CEO in, and I was in that sort of transition after our first was born, thinking about, what am I really going to focus on here next? And then completely out of the blue, I get an email from Luzdelia Gerber, and I didn't know the first name, but I knew the surname. And Luzdelia Gerber is Michael's wife, and she reached out and she said, call me. And she just had a phone number. Now, this is completely random, out of the blue. I had zero contact with them before that. Like you, I knew the E-Myth and had been a big fan of Michael's work. So I called. It was first thing in the morning for me, which was their afternoon because they're based in California, Carlsbad. And I got through to her straight away, and she said, do you know my husband? You might have heard of some of his work. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard of Michael Gerber. And she said, well, he's launching the last book in his E-Myth series called Beyond the E-Myth. And normally we go through HarperCollins, but for this book, we wanted to completely maintain the rights and have full control. So we've decided to self-publish. And she said, I happened to come across your book, which is the first book I wrote, called Authority Content. Oftentimes, when I have a business, I'll write a book which captures some of my core ideas. And she read Authority Content, watched me do the book launch from afar on the other side of the world. She said, I don't even really know how I found you. I think it was on some YouTube video or something. And she said, I loved what you did, and I was wondering if you'd like to do the same for Michael. And I said, well, I don't really launch books, but I would love to work with Michael. And because I'd focused on systemizing my business and I had the CEO, I went all in on this book launch for Michael. I wasn't working in the day-to-day of Melbourne SEO services at that point in time. And I had just over 3 months to launch Michael's book, and pretty much burnt the candle at both ends. I was chatting with Michael and his team and Luz Delia, and it was amazing to see how quickly doors would open when I just mentioned Michael Gerber's name. Oh, Michael's got this book launch that's coming up, and I lined up a truckload of podcasts for him and helped to orchestrate a lot of the launch campaign for it. And it was a huge success. The book was his first book to get a #1 bestseller in 24 hours. And as part of kind of like the final celebration, he invited me to the Dreaming Room, which was an event that he runs. And I'd flew myself and a couple of the team over that had helped me do the launch. And I went through the Dreaming Room with Michael. And at the end, Luz Delia said, oh, look, we've got a mastermind, because Michael's a little over 80 now, and he's thinking about the legacy of the E-Myth and what they're going to do with it. And she said, oh, would you like to stay on for a mastermind? We're kind of talking about the future of the E-Myth. And, of course, here I am in Carlsbad, California. I said, I'd love to. And then at the 11th hour, she said, oh, we've been trying to get Tony Robbins to facilitate the room, but we just can't make it line up, and we don't really have an MC. And she just said it as an aside. And I said, oh, look, if you don't have anyone to MC the room and you get stuck, I'd be happy to MC the room. And she said, oh, well, leave it with me. And then the next morning she comes around, she goes, you know what, if you'd like to do it, you can, because they were quite impressed with the book launch that I did. And here I am we're in this super swanky hotel, and he had the presidential suite, and I'm sitting in his room, and they've got these cameras all lined up, and everybody's sitting around on the couch, and I'm standing in front of the room with a flip chart as we're kind of mapping things out and masterminding. And I just remember almost like having to pinch myself and thinking 3 months earlier, I had zero contact with the Gerbers, and here I was standing at the front of the room guiding this mastermind. And it was just like a magical carpet ride. And at the end of the day, Luz Delia said, look, we've been so impressed. Would you consider running the E-Myth companies? Because Michael had been winding down. And I was just, my mind at this point, smoke's coming out my ears. I couldn't believe just this crazy ride I was on. They didn't need me to move to the States, and I just couldn't get that over the line with my wife. So I had to decline, but it's just been great to keep those doors open and chat with Michael. And he ended up writing the foreword to Systemology, and I told that story. And it's just been a bit of a game changer for me as far as not only getting to work with Michael, that was quite an experience, but then also just him giving Systemology the blessing, because it's almost like the how-to guide of the E-Myth. Like the E-Myth, like you, impacted me quite heavily, and I kind of felt like the E-Myth told you the how, like the why to, not the how to, and I kind of feel like I wrote Systemology to say, and here's how it's done. So that was, most definitely one of my wildest stories.
Well, it's a great story. It's a great book. I encourage you all to pick up Systemology wherever you go. I found it on Amazon, and it's been tremendous. David, again, thank you for your time. Any last minute thoughts? Any advice you have for maybe the struggling physician practice owner out there? Maybe what's the first thing that they can do to get started and maybe organizing their practice a little bit better?
I just hope that we lit the fire inside the physician to go, this is possible. And you might have tried to systemize in the past and it hasn't quite worked. Maybe it was the approach that you followed. But everybody, even if you don't see yourself as a systemized person, you can still own a systemized business. There's just a framework and a process that you have to go through. And it's definitely worth it. It is challenging, but to build a business that works without you, to step out from the day-to-day operations, to grow and scale just like Mike has, you need to have systems and processes. You've got to nail this. It's that important. And we've got a framework that works. So I'm hoping that that's enough for someone to go, ooh, I'm going to give this another look and I can do this.
Exactly. And just to top on it too, it's like, when you have a business, the ultimate goal of the business is to sell a business. And having spoken with private equity firms, they're looking for systemization, right? That's what they want to do. They want to make sure that if they're in it, that business can generate revenue without the owner. David, once again, thank you. Thank you for your time. And it was definitely a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Pleasure was all mine. Thanks, Mike.
And thank everyone for listening. As always, as an entrepreneur, you're going to have your ups and downs. But if there's one thing you could do in your business, whether it's, start getting more leads, getting more organized in your business, and keep moving forward.